Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is more Dark Souls PvP. This is the second installment of Iron and Rust. Hopefully you're enjoying the old school nostalgic content here as we start off in the Burg with a classic matchup of the Darkwood Grain Ring Chaos Blade versus the Murakumo. And you've seen a couple of these matches before, you've seen this player before, you've got an idea of what these dances are going to be as we dive and juke back and forth and try to see who can control space the best. So I've read some of the comments on the first video to see how nostalgic people are about the game and about their experiences and about interacting with the channel and the videos. And we're going to talk a little bit about that on top of analysing what's happening in the matches. And then a couple of things that I missed in the first video that I wanted to mention that I didn't get a chance to. The first one I want to pick up is that you'll notice this build right now is wearing night gloves. And night gloves, I think, give me about 32 poise, which, as you can imagine, against a curved sword, a curved great sword, two-handed, is not enough to endure it, so I have to be on the toggles or I'm just going to get destroyed. And the Murakumo is a very dangerous tool, which enables you to true combo. So if you get hit by this weapon that he's using at my poise threshold, I cannot get out of it unless I use the toggle mechanism. If I try to roll away from it, he will continue to hit me and it'll be the end of my night. On some footage, not this one, because this is another one where I'm at the 32 breakpoint, I think it is, you'll notice that I'm wearing the cleric gloves, the cleric gauntlets, and I don't think I fully explained on the previous video, but the reason I did that is because I was on a different build and I had to remake it and I didn't actually have the knight ones. And I popped the cleric ones on instead. They put me to about 38 poise, which is a much better breakpoint as far as taking some hits. Still not good enough to endure any kind of great swords to any extent, but enough for some of the smaller stuff. And that happened because I thought I'd killed the Taurus demon. And it had been so long since I'd played PvP in this game that I'd completely forgot the idea of if you wanted to host, you had to make sure that you didn't have your boss dead. And a lot of people kill bosses by accident, you know, to get through zones. And I did do a lot of that when I came back, so there was a curiosity as I get parried here and I swap to giants. And he doesn't riposte me, which was interesting. And then I get stuck in giants like an absolute fool, which is not the worst thing in the world. I'm mid-rolling, but I have incredible defense. Then he pulls out a couple of firebombs and he catches me coming in, but you can't really trade with the combustion, even though I'm trading with his Zweihander, and he thinks I'm dead, but I'm not quite dead. So it was just funny thinking that that's what had happened, and that's not what had happened at all. But because we were having problems connecting using the mod, and it was the first time I'd used the mod, we weren't entirely certain if the problems were on someone's end or something to do with the game. And I had that moment of paranoia where I thought, oh my goodness, I think I killed Taurus Demon. Why did I do that? I never do that. I always go through Drakes or use the Master Key, you know, and get through to the Darkroot Basin or something. So I swapped over to the other character, and thus the stats on that particular footage against the player with the Boulder Sword are slightly different. Much higher HP threshold, I think, even though it's comparable without the Mask of the Mother. So that's something to watch out for. And then another thing on the comments that I noticed was somebody talking about the latency and talking about how it seems pretty cool and everything, but here's an example of when you parried and you had to parry really, really early or it didn't work. And the idea that when you PvP, you cannot play the game like you're playing it against the engine. And for anybody that's done this to any extent of time, you know that that is absolutely that's absolutely true, sorry. That is how the game controls. And the thing with PvP that you have to get over, which takes a lot of time, is this notion that you're not really playing by what you see, you're playing by feel. And I know that might sound like some kind of new wave guru bullshit, but what it just means something like that right then. When I know he's going to flip a certain way and I think he's coming in, if I throw a parry out, that can work as a pretty dangerous but useful prediction. Because of the way the latency works, I know that if I catch him towards a certain part of a swing, I can get a counter on that. And that's what most of these interactions are. Like right now, when he's on the ground after a backstab and I have to engage him, and I kill him just then, but he comes around and hits me with the backstab. Even though right now I think he's dead, but I don't think he knows it, which is interesting. So we're having this interesting duel against a Leo ring, and he wasn't dead. There was the final hit. He was just at the tiniest portion of his life. But the idea here, guys, is you're playing around the desync in the game. And that might sound complicated, and it can be if you don't know how it looks in each other's perspectives, but even something as simple as that running attack I just did, on his screen, I'm not where I am, and he's not where he is on my screen. So we're playing around this theoretical spacing. And this sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's more about judging your connection by playing and learning, as I said, the feel for it. So I now have a decent... I didn't mean to do this, by the way. If you ever see me doing this with fireballs, it means I messed up the cancel. Mostly because I didn't come back to use fireballs. I used them all the time back in the day. It's not really my playstyle anymore, but they're fun to do, and I like to do silly things like that. Move there is a really good example. Whenever you do a running attack with a katana on latency in the PvP, you have to be very careful, because on their screen you tend to go places where you aren't on yours. So if you all of a sudden you get backstabbed, it'll be because you aren't where you think you are. And what it leads you to do to compensate, if you're new, or if you're just, taking time to learn, is you will want to do it earlier than it looks like you should. And it's the same concept with the parrying, it's the same concept with the kicking, it's the same concept with a lot of things. Like just then he kicked me, and it didn't touch me, but it still touched me. And the reason is, on his connection, he kicked me, and it looked like he kicked me. On my connection, I'm not that close, so it looks like it whiffs. And this is what you're playing with. And when you're new, it can lead to a lot of frustrations. There's a backstab punish on a fireball that I should have never thrown. And it's the same with a moment such as this when you're waking up. Getting up off the ground is really difficult in this game, especially against a player that knows what they're doing. And luckily for us here, we're having some fun. We're not going, full balls to the wall. It's not just backstab mix-ups on wake up. So we can get away with a lot of things that you wouldn't normally get away with a player that's not playing like this. That just then was a counter backstab on a strafe. These are the type of things that, if you don't know what they are and you don't know what they mean, something like that. He hit me then with the stun, and on his screen, he ran around my back, and then he backstabbed me. On my screen, it looked like he just run to the side, and all of a sudden I'm getting vacuumed. And if you don't have this information when you watch this, it's going to feel really strange, it's going to feel really shitty. It's going to feel like it's unplayable. And that's kind of what all these old players that are coming to fight here, some of them at least, some of these guys are quite new. This is what we all grew to accept and understand, and then some people never did. And this particular person in the comments, they just didn't take that time to commit to it and see how far that rabbit hole went. And I understand why, because it's that thing of, it don't look right, it looks weird, And that's why there's this big divide between PvE and PvP. And I always felt that I was somewhat unique when I made YouTube videos. Not because of my content or because of the particular stuff that was in them. It was the fact that I started off very PvE focused, and I did a lot of stuff, and I really delved into it, and I did my best with that content. And then I moved into PvP. And then I got really into the PvP, and I did that to the best of my ability for a long time, doing lots of different things. And then I kind of moved away again and went back towards the PvE and did that from a different angle. And I think because I got both sides, it gave me a perspective that was somewhat different to a lot of others. And I don't know if people resonated with that, I don't know if that shone through on the channel, that will be up to you to decide. But one thing you noticed, and it's understandable why you did notice this, is that you would have the PvEers who knew everything about PvP, but when it came to PvP, they were just lost. As you can expect, they didn't do it, it's a different game entirely. Everything is different there. When you play against the engine, the shield you choose is not the same shield you choose when you play against a human. The weapons that are really strong against the engine are not the same weapons that are really strong against a human, and these are the distinguishers that change how you approach what you're doing. So if you were to make a build to beat the game, it would look vastly different than a build to beat up another human. And this is why, when you get invaded, it oftentimes feels very unfair. Because you're running around with a completely unoptimal, weirdly spread, silly build to just beat the game, and the guy coming in is coming on a hugely specific, anti-several situations with defense in every area he thinks you might have, and really powerful combinations to shut down whatever offense you might have. So in that moment, it does feel kind of wagered in his favour, unless you know the game a lot more and they're not as experienced, or maybe you're just a better player. And that divide is a real thing, because it changes how you look at it. And then it established all these memes of, you know, this person's a PvP player, sorry. He can't play PvE. He's terrible against the engine. Here's a PvE player that can't beat players because they don't know how the lag works. They don't know how to use the desync. And depending on what camp you were in, depends on how you view a lot of it. And coming to a video such as this, if you're a person who does speedruns, if you're like a no-hit runner or some kind of challenge runner, and you watch this, you're probably going to be like, what the fuck is going on? How does this work? Why are everyone teleporting around? How come you're facing him and then all of a sudden you're getting backstabbed? And these are the parts where, you know how they say, you don't do it unless you love it. You know when you're describing something that to some people sounds like torture and just sounds really strange? Well, that's this PvP. And it's been demonized in many ways because of that, which is understandable. But it really does stem from passion and wanting to understand it. And it's funny right now because another game I'm playing, even though I don't get to get on it as much as I would like thanks to the heat and several other factors, is Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 is an amazing fighting game, and it is 50 times more balanced than this game will ever be. 50 times more functional and more structured in order for you to fight against another human and have what you could constitute as a good, fair experience, right? And in spite of that, I would rather play this. And I know that sounds, if you're a fighting game guy, that sounds insane. But this experience here, all the problems aside, all the like getting stunned and then getting backstabbed off the stun because I don't recover correctly, all of this pales in comparison to just how much I love it. And it might not always work right, and it might not always look right, and it might be frustrating, and it might be downright rage-inducing. It can be lots of things. But there's nothing quite like this. And after this game, we never saw it again. Not in this format, anyway. And it's really funny because it's kind of sent a schism through the communities, as often is the case. People who like Third Strike don't tend to be the same people that wanted to play and fully commit to Street Fighter 4. People that really like Street Fighter 4 don't tend to be the people that fully committed to Street Fighter 5 because the engines change, the systems change, the games change. That's just how it works. That's just the necessary evolution of these mechanics. And that's not to say that Third Strike's better than Street Fighter 5. You might think it is. I certainly think it is. But you might not like it, you know? And it's the exact same as here. When you play this game, there are things in this game that you will not get in Dark Souls 2, that you will not see in Dark Souls 3, that you will not see in Elden Ring, and vice versa. And then it leads to the different mentality and the different understanding. There are people right now that look at this game, and they honestly believe the backstabs are the worst part of it. 1000% believe that. They ruin the game. And when the remaster was coming out, there were so many forum posts talking about this idea that if they fixed the backstabs, this game would be perfect, this game would be amazing. And I think that that's really interesting for a bunch of levels, because I look at backstabbing in this game as a universal constant that keeps it exciting. And you'll notice I don't backstab all that much. I can, and there's times when I totally should, and I don't. But that doesn't mean that I'm not aware of it, and it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to do it. I like my PvP to be a good balance. I like to swing, I like to do silly moves, I like to space, I like to be a bit crazy. I like to do things you might not be expecting. And a lot of the times, it gets me backstabbed. However, without the threat of the backstab, all the things I'm doing would be relatively meaningless. They would probably be quite arbitrary and quite boring. Because there's no danger to it, you know? And the thing that I love the most about this mechanic is not how easy they are to do, or how ubiquitous they are, or how they've dominated the meta. I like the fact that I know when I'm at a deficit, there are specific tools I can rely on to help me even the score. And it's not just a universal comeback mechanic like some kind of ultra meter in Street Fighter 4, you know, or some kind of rage art that increases my damage. Dark Souls has those tools if you want to engage with them. It has Hornet rings you can swap to. It has Darkwood Grain rings you can put on for extra iframes. It has the Red Tearstone range to get an incredible boost of damage right at the moment you need it the most. However, in this game, at any moment I can decide that I want to do an incredible amount of damage to you, and if you overextend, it can happen. However, the reason why it works and it doesn't suck is because if you're good enough, you can stop me doing it. Because I have to earn them. And to a newer player or a lesser skilled player or just a lesser exposed player, that might not seem real. You might have PvP'd in the forest for a couple of hours with a buddy of yours, and the only thing that happened is laggy invaders came in and backstabbed you, and it was terrible. And everybody you didn't squash by just mashing them down with your build just teleport backstabbed you, and that was the end of your experience, and you never did again because the souls weren't worth it, the farming wasn't good, and you and your friend got frustrated. But here's the thing, right? What if I were to tell you that if I slowed down that footage of every time you got backstabbed, I can tell you why it happened? It changes how you view something once you understand that there's ways around it. And that's not to say that you're going to get around every backstab every time it happens, and connection has a huge role, but even a mechanic just then, did you see what I did there? This player tried to come around and stab me in the back because he has a playstyle where because his damage is quite low, backstabs become really, really viable, and he likes to circle for them every so often, which is a valid tactic, as I get parried and he runs away, he doesn't believe it, and then I try and parry him coming in, but it doesn't quite work, and right there, I get the stun, I get the counter backstab. As he came in for that backstab, I changed my positioning to counter him. That movement choice I did wasn't perfect, but in that moment, it was enough so that I turned his opportunity into an opportunity for myself. And this is why it's easy to just say backstabs are terrible. And don't get me wrong, there are moments when even I would prefer them not to be as prevalent as they are, but you need to accept that they're part of this experience, and once you accept and understand them a bit more than just an entry level, you'll come to appreciate that the fact that they're there. And this is one of the things I don't think I truly grasped when I was in it. Because they say, don't they, you know, if you listen to, is it Andy from The Office? He says it'd be really nice to know that you're in the good old times or the good old days when you're actually present in that moment. And I didn't know that Dark Souls was the good old days until many, many years after, when I craved it and I couldn't get it anywhere else. And it's things like the backstab, which I always understood, and I say understood, I didn't know everything. There's a lot more techniques that I'm really rusty on, and some of them I wasn't very good to begin with, and I need a lot more practice, but fundamentally, I always respected backstabbing as much as it was cheesy, and you know, we all said things like parry fishing and backstab fishing and, you know, things like that. All the classic excuses back in the day. You only won because you used a Hornet. You only won because you stacked poise. You only won because of insert reasons my ego has been wounded. But when we went to Dark Souls 2, and I couldn't even punish someone healing, in that moment, it taught me how precious that resource was. It really did. It showed me why that was such a good mechanic in that moment. And maybe not in every moment, because of course there's times when it feels really frustrating, times on certain connections where you just can't get your counters and it feels like it's inescapable. And sometimes you get outplayed, but you don't notice because it didn't look like that on your screen. I was fighting against one of the players that's in this video. He's the guy rocking the Jester gear with the Knight helmet and the Black Knight shield and really being super defensive and timing me super well and then hitting me with the greatsword. Me and that player were fighting, and I was practicing escaping his pressure when I was getting up off the ground after a backstab, and I was utilising a mechanic known as a barrel roll, which is just a silly way of saying a reverse roll where instead of holding backwards, you hold to the side, and it does this very specific movement. You'll see me do it in this series if you know what to look for. It's whenever you see me do a roll that's backwards and on a weird angle. That's what a barrel roll looks like. And depending on if you do it left or right, depends on where your back is. So it can be an interesting defense against somebody trying to chain backstab you, because you can change where your back is. However, if they go from a certain angle and you change your back to that angle, you'll get backstabbed again. So it's inherently dangerous. However, it can be the very thing you need to survive. And as I was testing this, the first time I did it, it worked. I was like, oh cool, I got away with it, that was nice. The next time I did it, it didn't work. And in that moment, I was like, oh, maybe I pressed the wrong side. But I didn't. What happened, and this is something I didn't see, it was something that the player told me afterwards, and then in that moment I realised I wasn't getting chained then because of latency, and because Dark Souls is fucking weird, even though it can completely be weird sometimes. I was getting chained because that player saw me do that evasion, and the next time I was getting up and I did it again, he chased it. He chased the roll, and he backstabbed it. And on my screen, it just kind of looked like he chained me. It didn't look like he chased me down. But the moment he told me that, every criticism I had went away. Because that wasn't, oh, bloody hell, silly lag, America, these Americans. It wasn't the 130 ping. It wasn't the shitty netcode. It wasn't the servers. That was a smart player picking up on a pattern and beating me with a hard read. And when that happens, you can't be mad. Because you got outplayed, and that wasn't a controller, that wasn't aim assist, that wasn't some bullshit equalizer, that was a brain. And that was a really clever move. And that's what I love about this, because Dark Souls in many ways, especially when I played it back in the day, you go back and watch my old footage, I'm flipping around, I'm mixing my moves up, I'm being creative, but there's not a lot of thought going on. I'm very just in the moment having a great time, and I'm still like that, but thanks to Street Fighter and thanks to fighting games, there's a lot more going on behind the smile, you know? I'm thinking about what you're doing. I'm thinking about what you want to do and where you want to be. And these thought processes change everything. And not only was this game fun when I was playing it from just that pure jubilant, I want to have a good time position, but you could really say I was playing checkers. You could. I was on that entry level. And I'm not to say that I'm any better now or I'm this huge deal. I'm not, you know. I'm just an old Dark Souls fan coming back to play a game I adore in a new way, even though it's an old way in many ways. So I was this chess player who had a lot of success against a lot of bad players. But now I've come back and I'm playing chess instead of checkers. And the players are still a mixture of abilities and levels. But it's so much more interesting because I'm seeing things I didn't used to see. And that's what makes it so exciting. And the cool thing is, you have this combination of experience and this combination of experience away. And as I mentioned, I PvP'd in Dark Souls 2. The last time I PvP'd in Dark Souls 1 was just before Dark Souls 2 came out, and then everybody moved over to Dark Souls 2, and it just so happened that I didn't really like it. And that's not to say that I didn't cover it, because I did. And if you're familiar with the channel, you remember. I did invasions in the different covenants. I did invasions with some different builds. And then I started to struggle to get invasions. I just didn't get the traffic that I should have been getting. And I don't know if it's because I had a strict nat or something, or like a bad nat type at the time. Or if it was just, I don't know, maybe my soul memory wasn't at the part where everybody was. I'm not entirely certain. What I do remember is that I didn't like fighting on the bridge in the Iron Keep. I thought it was just boring. And I was definitely moving away from dueling, because I dueled a lot in this game and had a lot of fun doing it, but I wanted to invade. And over the Dark Souls lifespan, I went from this person that bowed and expected you to bow and got really mad when you didn't, and then got stabbed in the back a lot. And then I understood the game on a much better level after I'd PvP'd everywhere, and then when I came back, my attitude changed. So when I went into Dark Souls 2, my attitude was that when I was invading, I wanted to be a scourge, I wanted to be a pest, I wanted to be a negative element in your world trying to seek your blood, and you can do whatever you want to stop me. And if I were to do any kind of duels, I would play it like I usually did, which is I would, you know, err on the side of the honour, and I would try my best to give you a good fight that I thought was worthy of my abilities and of my own personal preferences. And what ended up happening is I couldn't get many fights. I did the Belfry for a bit. I didn't really like it. And then in the end, I ended up going to the arena. And the arena is where I spent most of my time in Dark Souls 2, because it's where I got the most traffic. But I didn't understand how the arena worked at the time. So what ended up happening is I ended up going in there with like a 125 build, because that was the meta from Dark Souls 1 that I was playing under. And then the arena paired you against people of almost any level. So I was playing against these people in full havels with all these different magics and all these different weapons, and it felt like they were 100/200/300 levels higher than me. And don't get me wrong, on most players, that's not a problem because most players are not very good and you can use your abilities and your understanding to beat them. But every so often, if you came up against somebody that wasn't at that level, and I fought against a bunch of people that you might remember back in the day in the arena. I fought against Yami, who was this huge style bro from Dark Souls 1 doing all the ring swaps and everything, and he was a good player. I fought against Fisto, another really good player from Dark Souls 1. That guy's been around the block a long time, if you know that name. I fought against a bunch of different folks back in the day there, and I had some good fights and some close fights, but I didn't like the movement in Dark Souls 2. And this has nothing to do with the being able to sprint while locked on, or the 8-way movement. I think that's amazing, and I'm glad they added that. I think it's a fantastic function, and I miss it. But I did not like how the movement actually felt. I didn't like how it looked. I didn't like how the roll looked, or how it felt. I didn't like how hitting enemies felt. I just didn't like any of the visual design of that game. It looked odd, and it just didn't feel satisfying to me. And the reason for this, which I came to understand later on, because if you go back and you watch my Dark Souls 2 content, you'll notice I was so in love with Dark Souls. I was so smitten. I wanted Dark Souls 2 to be the perfect game because of how much I loved this game. And it blinded me in that moment towards certain elements that I didn't enjoy. And I tried my best to convince myself I was having fun, but I wasn't. And that's not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it's fun to deceive yourself. But it was a lie. And slowly but surely over time, my opinion on that game really started to change. And I want to put here, this is not Dark Souls 2 is a terrible game, horrible PvP, this and that. This is not that. I've said my piece on that game. I've said lots of things on that game. And I'm coming back now to say more things. And the one thing I want to put out there for people to remember is that I think Dark Souls 2 is an amazing game. And I think it's an awesome game for a certain type of player. And if you like it, I'm really, really happy for you, and I'm jealous. Because I want to love that game, and I just can't. And I may never play it again. I don't get the impulse to go back, I don't hunger for it, I don't have any of the old cravings. And I get them for other games. So Dark Souls 2 to me is kind of this interesting oddity that's for other people. And I know that a lot of people really like it because it's got lots of weapons. I know that there's a lot of fine-tuned movement to the lock-on and how you can attack inside of it and aim your attacks. And I know it has lots of interesting tech that enables you to do lots of cool things. So in many ways, when people tell you that Dark Souls 2 has the best PvP, they say this because of all the build variations, and they say it because of all the interesting mechanisms and mechanics that people came up with and were able to figure out. I just hate it on a fundamental level, because I don't like those features I mentioned, and if I don't like how the game looks, and if I don't like how the game feels, I'm not going to get any kind of connection to it, and thus I'm not going to have the time that I have here. And that's why this video exists, and you won't see this for Dark Souls 2. Unless something strange happens, and who knows, you can never predict how the future's going to work. I never anticipated playing Dark Souls PvP ever again. I thought those days were done. And when the remaster came out, I didn't even want to reopen that wound. Because when I heard that they'd changed things, that you could flask as an invader, that there was no dead angles, I didn't want to sour the memories of the beautiful experience I had with the game. And this might sound silly to some people and a bit like, why are you taking it this seriously? It's just a game. But to me, it wasn't just a game. To me, it was almost like a movement. It was a moment in time. It was a zeitgeist. And I remember being on the streams and being part of the community and making uploads and contributing to that growing understanding of what this game was. And even though I was only a small part of it and nowhere near as influential as others, I was still on that wave, riding that momentum. And I was quite late to it too, and I didn't do Demon Souls. Dark Souls was my first. And because of that, it's so special. And they call it, don't they? It's a sense, is it recency bias that some people use? Some people really struggle with recency bias. Like if you get into a band, you tend to love the album that you got into them with. Even though it might not even be a good album. It might be objectively really rough, and it's not a problem if you like it because music's subjective, but that recency bias can really blind you to what you really love and what you really like. And I'm fortunate in this regard because, as I've said, it was 2013, wasn't it? 2013, the last time I really touched this game in a super serious manner. And that's not talking about going back to do special runs or challenge runs and things. Because I always go back to Dark Souls 1, it's one of my all-time favourite games, I never get bored of it. But I don't always go back and fight people. That's different. And that's where we find ourselves today with this video right here. And that's why this series is really special to me. And that's why I'm going to be putting up a decent amount of PvP, trying to get some cool clips and some cool fights and to share it with you guys, because I never anticipated that's where my channel would go. And that was actually when my channel was at its best. That was when I was at my strongest, when my numbers were the best, when I was really going places and super optimistic of what the future would hold. And I think we can both agree, it did not turn out for me. And that's okay, because I value what I have, and I value what I got, and I value what I learned. And all of these things culminate in what my life is right now. And just because I'm not the most popular YouTuber in the world, you know, dripping in jewels from all the insane swag of being the greatest YouTuber that ever lived, although I don't have that, when I turn off the stream or when I turn off YouTube and I move away from it and I go into my actual life, that's where I'm rich. I am so fortunate and so... I don't know how I got so lucky in that regard. And to me, that balance, that's where the true quality is. You know? We might not always get what we want, and is it frustrating that I can't share these videos to more people and get them nostalgic like I am? Sure, but if you're listening right now and if you've left one of those comments, you are exactly the person that I aimed this at. Because you're a little bit like me. You miss the days of when the Burg overflowed with phantoms. You miss the days when people were getting backstabbed from 5 meters away and getting zoinked back and complaining because they didn't realize how to defend against it. You know, it's funny what you come to miss. And after Dark Souls 2, we got Bloodborne, and the PvP in Bloodborne wasn't what I was looking for, and I actually never PvP'd. Oh, nice parry. I never PvP'd in Bloodborne. I just didn't see the point. It just seems so stupid. And who knows, maybe Bloodborne PvP is underappreciated and it turns out it's actually really amazing, but Bloodborne to me is a PvE game. And I did a lot of stuff with that. I absolutely adore that game. I wish they'd put it on a system that's, you know, not the PlayStation. If we could get that on PC with the emulator or just on Steam, I'd be so happy because that game is phenomenal. But from there we went over to Dark Souls 3. And Dark Souls 3 is a really cool game. It's pretty popular at the moment to shit on Dark Souls 3 and to make out like it wasn't very good. And I don't like that. And I suppose everybody shits on everything, don't they? It's just the internet. The negativity is so rampant sometimes, and it sells so well. I wish I'd have tried to parry that R2 on the Murakumo, but for some reason my old instincts kept coming out, and I kept trying to go for the roll backstab every so often, even though we weren't backstabbing each other all that much because we were in this really interesting dance, but sometimes you just can't turn it off. Like just then, it wouldn't surprise me then if he just did that on instinct, because it kept happening to me. And when you're in a really close fight, sometimes you don't want to just backstab someone because then the fight's over, you know? Sometimes you want to dance with death a little longer. And especially now there's all this tech that I never got a chance to experiment with, and why would I not experiment with it? Like, I want to start trying to land some hyper pivots, I want to start trying to land some perfect blocks, but this stuff is really, really tricky to do, and this is the best opportunity to showcase it if I can. It's just because I don't know too much about it, I don't even know if I'm going to get it right. Anyhow guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next part. You take care now.